It was a big detriment and a massive responsibility that was ungraspable when it said, the rancher and the farmer feeds the world. And it's like, whoa, that's a lot. And that's actually, we want to feed our communities, and we want to feed ourselves and our families. And each farmer and rancher does that all over the globe. And that was a big thing. And that was what created big ag in all the wrong ways.
This is A New Angle, and I'm your host, Justin Angle, marketing professor at the University of Montana College of Business. This podcast is my chance to speak with cool people doing awesome things in and around the great state of Montana. We are proudly underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot. Hey folks, welcome back and thanks for tuning in. A while back, I received a listener comment suggesting that we make the show more representative of the Montana economy and the agricultural sector in particular. So I'm excited today to dig into the topic of regenerative ag and some exciting things happening in the Tom Minor Basin of southwestern Montana. Malou Anderson-Ramirez and her family are doing some bold, controversial, and inspiring things, using technology in ways to make their ranching operation more sustainable and more integrated with the natural system in which they live. Malou is joined by A New Angle alumna Lara Birkes, who helps us understand what's happening in regenerative agriculture through the lens of rural entrepreneurship. You might recall that Lara referenced Malou's family ranch on several occasions during our first interview. So it was great to get these two together for a dynamic conversation, and I'm stoked for you to hear it right now. Okay, so we're here today with Malou Anderson-Ramirez and Lara Birkes back on the podcast for round two. Ladies, thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All the way from the Paradise Valley. Huh? Well, actually, it's Tom Minor Basin. It's part of Paradise Valley, right?
It's its own place.
It's its own thing.
It is at the edge of Paradise Valley.
At the edge. At the edge of a lot of things.
It is.
Paradise, Yellowstone, etc. So, Malou, you are an active rancher in the Tom Minor Basin. How many generations has your ranch been in the family?
I'm the third, and my children who are living on the place are the fourth.
Okay.
So.
And did your family establish the ranch?
No, we were actually newbies on the ranch back in the 50s when my grandfather purchased it after coming back from World War II and moving back west, needing to get out of the family business in the Midwest, and found Tom Minor Basin when he was looking for hay for some cattle he had down in Paradise Valley at the time.
Okay. So found plenty of hay?
Found some of the best hay ever, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So the two of you kind of, how actually did you cross paths? I mean, Lara, you're relatively recent back to Montana, Paradise Valley in particular. We're going to encourage listeners to listen to the previous episode where we kind of got more of your story. But the two of you crossed paths somehow. I'd love to hear that story.
You're better at it.
We met at the old saloon.
Okay. Is that the name of the old saloon, or is it just the old saloon?
It is the old saloon in Immigrant, Montana. That's the short explanation. But we're also on the Western Sustainability Exchange board together.
Okay. And what is that organization all about?
So the Western Sustainability Exchange, based in Livingston, works with farmers and ranchers on carbon soil sequestration initiatives. And Malou and her family have been a part of that for a long time.
Okay.
So we met around that, but also neighbors in relative terms in Paradise Valley, and similar interests. And I have learned so much from Malou and her family around what it means to have a sustainable business in the context of the rural Mountain West.
Yeah, we're going to talk all about what all that stuff means. Yeah. So, what actually, let's just start there.
Yeah.
I mean, what is, to you, Malou, and your family, what is a sustainable business? What does that mean?
Boy, I think that's changed a lot for us over the years. When talking and ranching, it's profitability and being able to stay on the land. We've always been really fortunate in our family to have education as a really important, pivotal part of the work we do, and so we all left the ranch in one form or fashion to get education, either from Missoula to back east.
Sure.
And so that always sort of set us apart from a lot of our friends and neighbors, and that we were not necessarily more educated than anyone, but we just had a different angle of thinking of things.
Okay. A little broader worldview? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yes, I would say so.
And where did you study psychology? Is that right?
Yeah, I started here in wildlife biology in Missoula.
Okay.
And then went to psychology in Bozeman and with an emphasis on animal-assisted therapies.
Sure. And practiced in that space for a while?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And what was the intention always to go back to the family business, or what did that TikTok look like?
Not necessarily. The family business was always a mixed enterprise. I mean, I shouldn't say that. The family business was always not just cattle and agriculture. We were always raising cattle and sheep, and we raised sheep first with some cattle, and then the wolves were reintroduced, and that was a good time for us to say goodbye to the sheep since we neighbor Yellowstone Park. Call us crazy. And then my dad has been an educator, a lifelong educator, a school administrator. He works and lives in Alaska most of the year. My mom is a PA, physician's assistant, who also has worked in and out of the village systems in Alaska for many years, since I was in high school, almost 20 years. And they're both sort of thinking about retirement. And so the ranch has always had agriculture along with these other things.
Okay. And has that been just a decision born out of necessity that we have to have these other income streams to keep the whole enterprise afloat, or is that just, hey, we want more than one thing in our life?
I think both.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Both.
Interesting.
Yep.
And let's spend a little bit of time. I'm not sure how familiar with ranching in general our listeners are. You might have various conceptions of what that looks like. Can you sort of talk about the range of types of ranch operations in a state like Montana?
Sure.
What that looks like?
Sure. And I'm no expert, but conventionally, a cow-calf operation is a pretty standard form of agricultural income.
Okay.
Or a stock grower of some sort. And so often in Montana, that is a cow-calf operation, and that's an old conventional system. That can also be cropland, diverse cropland of either hay or alfalfa, and then also other crops for people.
Sure.
And then now it's really changed pretty seriously in the direction of being able to raise different classes of animals and breeds. And so a different class of animals would be like a cow-calf versus a yearling stocker or a 2-year-old grass-finished steer.
Okay. All different forms of beef products, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And so now in the regenerative model, and also just a sort of a new form of ag, you can make quite a bit of money in things like custom grazing, where you don't own animals, you own the land. The landowner has the land, and someone else brings cattle in to graze and utilize your grass resource. And if you know what you're doing in a land healing type of situation, then you can utilize that animal as a tool. So you're getting a double benefit. You're getting paid for your grass.
Sure.
And you're also utilizing that tool to better your range.
Okay. Okay. And so where
changing.
So a wide variety, like what would be sort of the standard, like corporate style ranch? Do those exist in Montana?
Oh yeah. I would say the standard corporate style is a big cow-calf operation.
Okay. And selling their product into a feedlot eventually.
Yep. Yeah. Selling calves in the fall.
Yep.
Calving out in the winter. And now, thankfully, it's turning more and more into sort of spring calving or even better, summer calving. But yeah, cow-calf operation, winter calving in the winter and selling in the fall.
And why is that even better? Just because it's better climate for having babies?
Yeah, well, I shouldn't say it's not necessarily better financially, although there are models that it could be. But it's better when you are mimicking nature, and in regenerative ag, you're ranching with nature, and in nature things have babies in late spring and early summer.
So let's dig into that term regenerative ag, because I've heard you mention that a couple of times in the last minute or two, and that's an area where I think you and Lara collaborate. What is regenerative ag? What is it as a broad concept?
There's a few different definitions. I'd say that one thing is that it's very minimal inputs. So in conventional agricultural systems, there's a lot of talk about fertilizers, inputs onto your landscape that make it better, quote unquote better. In regenerative ag, it's minimal inputs. And if there are inputs, it's natural, and it's based on a greater system already at work, the ecosystem that we are just part of, instead of trying to dominate and change for our actual agricultural businesses. And then also with that goes into talks like soil health, carbon inputs and outputs, all these all these terms that we're using in the climate conversation and so forth.
Okay, so a couple things there that are probably not uncontroversial in your world. I heard the word carbon. I heard the word climate. Mm-hmm. And also sort of the when you started defining that term, it sounded sort of common sense, like working within nature. Yet on the flip side of that, like many view nature as this thing that we sort of is at our disposal or something that we need to control.
Yeah.
Sounds like regenerative ag is not that.
Yeah, it's the idea that we are not apart from nature.
Okay.
We are it, and it is us. So. How
did you get to? I mean, does that make you a pariah in your community, or like how do you fit in? Like, it sounds great to me, but
yes.
How does that resonate in your world?
There's a lot of layers. And some I can talk about and some I can't. I'd say that I am incredibly grateful to come from a family, and my parents especially, who deeply, from the very beginning, has deeply valued a relationship with the land. And that doesn't just mean moving cattle and riding our favorite horses, although that entails that as well. It also means exploring and experimenting with a very deep spiritual connection. As my grandmother used to say long ago, before it was cool, I say now, we look at landscape in terms of a spiritual asset, and so it's the connection is not just like tied. In agriculture, you hear these beautiful romantic stories about these multi-generational ranchers being tied to the land, and
right.
To me, it's I think in pictures, and it's more than just a knot, that ties us to the land, and so I'm really grateful that we were raised in that. That was the normal piece, and even though we were raised in a conventional agricultural system, there was always a magical piece to it that I can't really put into words, but it was just part of the energy. And then when we started to do some more work, reflective work on the landscape as a family, and in deep personal work and some, just spiritual aspects on the landscape, that's when it really rang true, and we felt much more, that connection was very real. And
yeah, so this runs deep. This isn't something that you went off to a fancy college and came back with.
No,
right?
it runs deep.
Right.
Yeah.
And Lara, you've been sort of working, and how many years have you been in Paradise now?
I guess we're getting close to 3 years now.
Okay.
I've been back.
And so you see the distribution of different types of approaches to the land, different types of approaches to entrepreneurship. How would you sort of classify the Anderson family relative to kind of the landscape in the valley?
So when I came back and tried to start thinking about what was that local application of what I had been doing in sustainability with large companies, how did that apply in the rural Mountain West and potentially with businesses? Kind of two categories that broke out. One was around the solutions that need to be activated, and the other was around the challenges that needed to be solved. And when I say challenges that need to be solved, it was looking at things like very concrete examples. We have recycling shortages in Montana. It's not realistic when we're talking about plastic and glass. We don't have those same infrastructures in place that you do in large metropolitan areas. Mm-hmm. Similarly, there are other countries that are looking at how you use glass and plastics in roads. Is this a challenge in Montana that we should be deploying entrepreneurs and the Montana Department of Transportation to think about addressing? That's sort of a challenge you saw.
Okay.
Another really
all the stuff it's not efficient to recycle it on site, or maybe it is in a different way,
or to truck it, because right now,
right.
If it is recycled, oftentimes it's trucked long distances. So then you think about the carbon footprint of that. Yep. Versus an immediate need in a community. Is that not a local entrepreneurship opportunity to pair those, that need, that challenge?
I could tell a really interesting story. Well, it's interesting to me because it brings back some flashbacks of was doing the Ironman in Hawaii, right? And I have this fancy bike with these fancy wheels and these fancy race tires, and I've flown, over this ocean to get there. I get all these flat tires in the lead up to the race, and one of the locals was like, "Yeah, dummy, because the roads are made out of glass here." think they recycle the glass into the pavement.
Interesting.
And
Wow.
it's like, man, I should have known that. I would have bought more durable tires. But
There's
anyway,
there's an opportunity for a new kind of tire, right?
maybe.
You're always thinking.
Yeah, or just round the edges of that damn glass.
Yeah, exactly. Grind it up more.
Okay, so recyclables into the roads and other infrastructural, like probably playgrounds and things like that. So that interesting. So that's a challenge. And
So
then
a
the
challenge to
solutions piece.
solve, and then thinking about solutions to activate. That's when Malou and the idea that maybe you can talk about in a second around teal tags comes to play, which is we have an amazing expert in Malou and understanding the future of ranching, how that can be done in conjunction with the landscape. But how do we start to pair those ideas in a way that activates them with entrepreneurs?
Okay.
So the business school has actually been a part of piloting what this can look like, bringing in MBA students to help Malou with one of the business ideas that she has. But we need more of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So instead of creating something that's either a nonprofit, like right now there's a polarity of things. You have a nonprofit model, and then you've got a really rigorous business model. Those
Sure.
are kind of the duality that we see play out most often. But what's the fourth sector? How do we fund business solutions? So it doesn't have to be your usual 10, 20x returns that investors are used to requiring, frankly, before they're willing to make that investment in a new business. It's something in between, because the example Malou, I think we'll give in a minute, has a lot of different impact metrics. There is revenue potential. There's also local employment potential. There's something that feeds back into a need that's in the rural Mountain West. And it has global scale, too, but in a way that can be piloted in a particularly unique area like Paradise Valley.
I mean, what you're talking about, this fourth sector, it sounds distinct from this notion of social investing. Right? Social investing seems like you're sort of accepting a lower rate of return in exchange for some social value. But what you're talking about seems more holistic.
It's a more holistic way of thinking about business.
Right.
So it's not to say that you don't expect returns, but it is a much more patient capitalist approach. And I think we're seeing more and more investors that begin to understand that there is a long-term cost to only looking at profit.
Mm-hmm.
What is the shareholder value, not the stakeholder value, not just the shareholder value. So looking at the stakeholders of a business, and that could be employees in addition to your shareholders, but in addition to your communities.
Mm-hmm.
So how are all of those made whole? Because then the business is much more likely to succeed. If you're just looking at returns and a bottom line, it's a lot of what we see in Silicon Valley that isn't lasting very long.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. To that point, exactly. Like you're not sort of a slave to a quarterly earnings report.
Exactly.
Right. So we're trying to create something more holistic, but also something more enduring. So is this when we pivot to teal tags? This
Sure.
enterprise that you've sort of launched and conceptualized?
Yeah, it's conceptualized for sure. We're hoping to launch soon. Within the next year or two.
Yeah, tell us all about it.
Yeah, there's a lot to go there. So it's originally so it's teal tags. It's the acronym is technology, education, agriculture, and landscape. And my middle name happens to be Teal.
Oh.
So basically the idea came when I was out trying to find a carcass, and so our ranch is in really wild country right next to Yellowstone. We have a really high population of grizzly bears and wolves, and a lot of added challenges that come along with just making it work in ag. And so keeping our animals alive and keeping that platform of tolerance as wide as we can is a big issue. And so being the family that we are, we want to see both happen. We want to see conservation of the rancher in that area, and we want to see wildlife and this, everything happening still. And so I was out trying to find a dead cow. And it was 2016 and in really dangerous country, and just thinking. And then once we find the dead cow or the dead animal, we have to skin it.
Well, and it's dead because it just hasn't come back. You haven't been able to herd it up.
Yeah, or you look for sign. So you're out
Okay.
checking cattle, and if you see bird sign or if you see grizzly scat or wolf scat with brown hair in it, that's a problem. And there's a dead animal out there.
Okay.
And through the state of Montana, you have a compensation program through the Livestock Loss Board.
Okay.
So those ranchers ranchers who are losing those animals due to predators are at least getting compensated for that loss if the investigation can determine if it was truly a kill. So you have to find these kills immediately.
Sure.
They're
so
gone.
There's a financial incentive and a pragmatic incentive to find them right away.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. And while I have varied opinion on that compensation program, but that's a whole other thing. So we were out trying to find these animals and the herds, and I just thought, it's 2016. There's got to be a better way. This is incredibly dangerous, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense. This is not sustainable.
There's probably a tag on the grizzly bear that killed the
right. There's probably a tag exactly that they have more on them. And so I just started, knowing that we have some satellites up in the air and just realizing that, wow, why can't we just find something where we are tagging these animals with, a GPS, a wellness tag that's a GPS, a body temperature and a heart rate so that we would know fight or flight. We would also know if an animal, just a wellness chip. And those are in animals all over the place and livestock, but they're extremely expensive. And so for a rancher, it has to be very cost effective.
Sure.
If actually it has to be lower than cost effective for a rancher to even consider it. And so the idea was, okay, what if we've created this low cost program that is then real time. So there's an algorithm in that chip, in that tag, that determines if there's a little, funkiness that happens with body temperature or heart rate. And so then we would know in real time, so it would ping to an application on the producer's phone that, 232 is out in the permit right now and something's happening, whether or not it's a grizzly bear attacking
under stress
her. Somehow it's sick or something.
Yep.
And then if, say, we are a 5-hour horse ride away, which is often the case where I'm from, we could put a drone up in the air and quickly go and get some video data on what's happening with that cow. And so then that actually eliminates the need to skin an animal in grizzly bear country.
Sure.
And we can then get that compensation, and the investigative report from It's a Wildlife Services report, and they could use that data, which I've spoken to many of them as well, and that this would be incredibly useful for them. And so that was the beginning of teal tags, a predator, a conservation of, and really it's a conservation of large carnivores, because we want to see the grizzly bears and the wolves. We don't want them to get killed by the rancher, but we also want the rancher to survive. And actually more importantly too, in a lot of ways, we need large landscapes to stay large due to ranchers staying there.
Yeah. So you have, there's a couple things within that. So you've got, not only does the teal tag serve this purpose of, providing a more efficient mechanism for locating and deriving this compensation quickly, but also are there ways it can be predictive of conflict with predators and so forth?
Yeah, probably, especially when it goes into the sector of wildlife chipping and understanding their movement and their behaviors more. There was sort of a phase 2 of thinking about how we could train predators, by hazing them when we come onto them, but I have issues with that. I feel like there's some invasiveness in that.
Yeah, what do you mean by hazing?
Hazing is what we do to large carnivores or anything that, say, so up in the Basin, if we have a grizzly bear that's coming too close to headquarters, we would, if she is a repeat offender or he is a repeat offender, we would shoot cracker shells up into the air, really loud bullets.
Okay.
Or there's a lot of different ways that FW, Fish and Game, and Wildlife Services haze animals. And sometimes it's a gray area, but sometimes ranchers are allowed to do that as well, more so in the past when there's an issue, a consistent issue.
Sure.
And they're very smart and they learn quickly. And there's a lot of hazing that happens in the park, around, not a lot, but there's hazing that happens in the park around grizzly bears coming in too close to.
Yep. Okay.
And other carnivores, and all over the world. The polar bears are hazed a lot with villages, and elephants are hazed in Africa with coming into villages, and so
it's effective, yet it puts stress.
It's
on
invasive.
A population.
It is, and we don't want to do that, and so that's actually off the table at this point until we can sort of identify what that looks like a little bit better.
Okay.
But phase 3 would be the use of sort of an idea of geofencing or virtual fencing, using the wellness tag to help really create amazing regenerative, holistic grazing patterns that can be of service to large mass herds of bison and cattle, so that we can again utilize that cattle as a tool to heal our land and to make it better.
A New Angle is brought to you by First Security Bank and Blackfoot, two cool companies doing awesome things all over Montana.
Hey, this is Mark Moss from Tell Us Something, and you're listening to A New Angle.
Yeah, how does geofencing work? What is that, and how do you actually do it?
It's pretty new. They're doing they're experimenting a lot in New Zealand and Australia. But basically, for this, it's sort of like an invisible dog fence. It's the same idea.
Yeah, that's sort of what I imagined when you were laying it out there.
Yeah, but instead of actually burying cable, it would all be, it would be virtual.
Be in the tag.
Yeah.
Okay, so the tag coordinates to some GPS, and when the animal goes someplace it shouldn't, it gets pinged somehow.
Yeah, exactly. It sort of vibrates in the ear as it gets closer to a barrier, a fence that you can change and manipulate and move, or, say you have a sensitive riparian area or a wildlife corridor or something. You can then sort of keep your animals, your livestock out of those places. So... it's going to happen. That'll be the future of agriculture at some point.
Yeah. It seems like a slam dunk. Okay, this makes my life a lot easier. I don't have to break my back putting up a fence, taking down a fence, repairing a fence, all this other stuff. But there has to be resistance.
There
right?
is.
I would imagine.
Yep.
Did neighbors just sort of say, "No way, I want a real fence"?
No, my neighbors have all been very. Everyone's very excited.
Nobody says good geofences make good neighbors, right? That's not a thing yet? Sorry.
No, but that will be a thing. I think the biggest resistance I get is two things. One, the main thing, and actually it's my brother that is my devil's advocate who runs and helps run one of the biggest grass-fed companies in Montana. And he is very connected to the land. And he said, so is this going to take away why I do this? Why is this going to take away my cowboy way of life?
Right.
And being able to take that 5-hour ride out and try to find the carcass. And my answer to that is no. After growing up on these operations together and literally riding together for many hours of many days, the amount of labor it takes to do things that it could be much more efficient with new tools, allows us to find more nourishment on the land that drives us in agriculture. And that nourishment is a very little percent right now. It's not fun to do most of the other things that we have to do in agriculture to make it work, like vaccinating cattle and running them through a chute and branding. And, I don't like branding. I know many people do, but it's barbaric and there's a better way. And I don't care who you are. It's true. But that way we can find more time to do the things that really nourish us.
Sure. So, Lara, how do you sort of see the stuff that Malou and her family are developing, whether it's techniques, whether it's devices, whether it's the intersection of those two things? How are you sort of approaching this from the business standpoint of helping things like this come to life in a way that they can become products and services that other people purchase, subscribe to, etc.?
I think another big component of what Malou's described through teal tags is the link back to our food systems. And that's something we've been talking about over the last few days.
Right.
So when I consider the supply chain verification of what the Anderson Ranch is doing, you can trace everything back to a source and to a practice. And in all of the conversations we have around certifications and verification and knowing that people want to have that certainty of where their food comes from, in addition to understanding how it was raised and treated, and even better if there's a biodiverse ecosystem component to that, how do we represent this to a consumer or to a buyer in a way that they can immediately understand that it's credible? And while this may be, a little bit off in the future, one of the conversations has been around, a blockchain.
Yep.
And I know that was something we talked about previously, but it's a classic example because it gets back to this whole notion of rewarding best practices, keeping ranchers on the land. How do you come up with ways of actually commoditizing this? And when I say this, it's all of the practices that we're describing here that have that bear a premium price in the market and should. So
when you say bear a premium, does the product coming out of your ranch, Malou, command a premium in the marketplace? Is that what you're getting at?
Yes, I think, and not even off my ranch, off of all the ranches in the Yellowstone country.
Okay.
And actually, we are a really small ranch compared to the ones who are really doing a lot of work. Absolutely. Just direct traceability to those animals, and not just that, oh, good, this animal came from this ranch. It's more like, what had to be done to keep this animal alive, and how was this animal raised, and how did they go above and beyond to do the right thing in animal husbandry and humane practices. And then also keeping in mind of the ecosystem. What do we do to not just tolerate a wild ecosystem, but to enhance it and to support it?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the stories now, that's what people want to hear. We don't want to just eat meat anymore. I mean, a lot of people do. We want the stories and the narrative behind that meat, the heart space feel of, what experience is this as I eat this, and what happened here? And that, thankfully, is sort of an emerging trend in the food we're eating.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, although that trend is sort of, and maybe this is just the way these sort of things bear out, but it to me, it exists in a world of a bit of privilege.
For sure.
Right? Like I go to Whole Foods and I buy this fancy steak, and I can scan the blockchain and figure out, its name and how it was treated. It's like a skid out of Portlandia, right? Does it have to start there and then, I don't want to use trickle down, but sort of permeate down the food chain, so to speak, in terms of socioeconomic status or accessibility? Or
Well, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but it's true. We don't need the amount of animals, of beef animals, that we have on the planet.
Yeah.
We just don't. We can.
Yeah, talk about that more. Like, I don't know what that premise
we
means.
just need to change the way we're eating. And we need, maybe not, as Lara puts it, it's not how much we're consuming, it's what we're consuming and the value of what we're consuming. And so, perhaps it's not ideal in the future in sustainability to eat meat 7 times a week or 5 times a week.
Right.
And perhaps we should just eat it a few times a week along with everything else.
But eat higher quality, cleaner.
And higher quality.
Yeah, produce more ethically.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm getting it.
Yes, and why can't we look at that? Because at this point in time, it's just, I don't know, we all know what it looks like. And then bring in the climate conversation about that, and cattle and what that all means, which is very real. I mean, whether or not we as ranchers want to accept it or not, it's a very real conversation. And this is where, again, I get myself in trouble, but it's true. And that's the other part of the teal tag that's so exciting, is that we can actually start to gather data around microclimate and around beef production and what the copyright carbon hoofprint.
Sure, carbon hoofprint. I like that.
What that looks like. Thanks to John if he listens to this. And so there's very real information there that we need to start gathering. And I'm sure we're starting to, but most of our data is coming from the soil and from the actual atmosphere, and not a lot of data is coming from the animal that's in the middle. And so that's really an exciting piece, because that takes the price point, which is a real big barrier, out of the rancher's hand and into government agencies and climate scientists and so forth. That we really need that data. That's climate infrastructure. So there's a lot of different angles this could go on. It started with a predator, as we were just talking. It's a Montana issue. It's a Rocky Mountain, Montana issue, predators and that interface. But it becomes a global issue very quickly when we talk about climate and food systems and a cracked and I'd say broken system of big agriculture that we need to move away from. And this could be a solution, or one of the solutions to a multifaceted thing.
By verifying the process that Malou has described, you then begin to see what doesn't exist in most food systems. So to your earlier question around price points, it shouldn't be something that only privileged people can purchase, but people need to understand the hidden costs of cheap products. They don't incorporate environmental externalities.
Yeah.
When you buy cheap meat, it usually has an animal welfare component to it, water runoff issues, desertification, all kinds of things that this system that we're describing here in Montana would not have. And so, yes, there is a higher cost to that, but that's also where you say, do I just treat this as something that I have on a few occasions as opposed to all the time? And that's a consumer behavior change.
Yeah.
And we're used to this, but we don't need that, dietarily. And so do we just begin to think about how we moderate that so that you are paying more, but that money is going back into a community, into an economy, and into an entire ecosystem that supports so much more than just that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that seems achievable. I mean, as we're talking about like the difficulty of adopting these various things, like I'm thinking, Malou, of you and your neighbors, and some people just saying, well, why the hell you don't want to just shoot the bears or whatever?
Oh, I get that question a lot.
Right, but like convincing those people that your way of doing this might be a through line that they haven't seen yet, that seems way easier than trying to actually like create a system that accounts for these negative externalities in people's daily choices. I mean, they pick up a Slim Jim at 7-Eleven and it's 50 cents. But all those other things that went into it, its production. Like that's a big question. I mean, this fourth sector thing might address some of that.
Yeah, exactly.
How do we get there?
Well, I think the nice thing about starting here is that you're not taking all of that on. So you're highlighting what's being done well. And if you start looking at what's being done well, then most people will start to question, well, if they're talking about all these things, then what are the other ones doing?
Sure.
Because they're not talking about it. And so I would say a critical mind will start to ask the questions that most people don't want to disclose for the cost of the high cost of a cheap good.
Yeah.
So it's not that we're describing taking on the whole large ag industry. It's highlighting the things, the best practices here, with the hopes that consumers will begin to really understand why you pay more for something like this.
And in that, the rancher becomes what used to be and still is. The rancher is sort of the villain of anything degrading to landscape and wildlife. And biodiversity, they are empowered and they become, in a lot of ways, if this is almost sort of a grassroots, it becomes they are the hero in this story, and we are the people who said, hey, we have that, we can use tech to preserve the really wonderful ways of the rural traditions and where we find our nourishment and our spiritual asset, while asking tough questions and moving on from the really crappy ones and being able to let go of the old traditions that no longer serve us and frankly never did. And so it's an exciting thing in the regen talk of regenerative agriculture and how even the old multi-generational ranching families can empower themselves and really be a fundamental piece in this shift.
I mean, that and Lara and I talked about this in our last conversation, that notion of the rancher, the farmer, the agriculturalist is the hero, I think really needs to be emphasized here.
Yes.
I mean, these folks are often vilified by urbanites who don't have a clue where their food comes.
That's right.
Or think they know and are judgmental about that, yet you and your colleagues are the people feeding all of us. And that has this deep nobility that I don't think is appreciated in this marketplace in a meaningful way.
Yep. It was a big detriment and a massive responsibility that was ungraspable when. Well, how was it that was said when it said, the rancher and the farmer feeds the world, and it's like, whoa.
Right.
That's a lot. And that's actually, we want to feed our communities and we want to feed ourselves and our families. And each farmer and rancher does that all over the globe. And that was a big thing. And that was what created big ag in all the wrong ways.
Right. And within that, like capitalism rewards specialization of labor. And so there's rewards to that, but a system that's so narrowly focused on specialization of labor, it creates these silos where we don't understand the labor that's occurring in other places. I think this happens whether it's manufacturing, whether it's service orientation, or whether it's agriculture. How do we? And I guess part of your mission, Lara, is to elevate some of these stories through Ground in Common, et cetera, so we create some awareness around this stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the one thing that almost everyone in the Rural Mountain West, certainly in Montana, certainly in Paradise Valley, shares is a desire for open space.
Yeah.
There are a lot of ways to do that, but what I think we're driving at here are new ways of quantifying how that happens. And as Malou said, it's keeping ranchers on their land. That's how you keep open space. But now the economic paradigms of how we value land have become so linked to property and real estate that the incentives to sell are so great. So what are the systems we can put in place to counteract that, or to at least lessen the disparity between those price points. And so that's everything from the ideas that Malou is describing and getting a premium for a product. It's also compensating farmers and ranchers through programs like the Western Sustainability Exchange in partnership with Native Energy for sequestering carbon and compensating those land management practices, and then ultimately gravitating towards a model that compensates ecosystem services, a very sort of wonky term.
We haven't fixed that term yet.
Last
time we talked about how bad a term that is.
It is. But yeah,
I thought we were going to fix that.
That's the nature-based solutions approach, right? And
right.
And a lot of those principles apply to the things that Malou is working on. So we need to be thinking about how all of those systems change, so that we're not just focused on real estate development for quantifying land and
sure.
Otherwise, it will go in a very predictable way that I don't think many people will be happy with in the long run.
I don't think we'd call it the Paradise Valley anymore.
No.
Right? So what gives you hope that, some of this stuff is going to take off? It's going to make an impact?
Well, I keep saying this will happen. This is going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's up to us. It's either going to be a tech company in Seattle or San Francisco or the Bay Area or here on our own land and in our own backyard,
Mm-hmm.
and we have all the capability to do that here. And so it has to happen. And if it doesn't, we're going to continue to be in the same. I go to quite a number of sort of conflict reduction conferences, and just how
predator conflict.
Yeah,
Okay.
and other types. I just was at a ranching with elk, brucellosis stuff, and how do we create a system where what put us there in the first place was the rancher?
Yeah.
And again, I have to be careful of that because I am one and come from some, but it's true. And so we also have to think about the up and coming students and the kids of the next generation. That's going to be really what does it. And I'm happy to be part of the movement, but it's really going to be the people that are coming out of these systems. So looking at the way classes are taught around agriculture and
Mm-hmm.
what are we teaching our kids? Because the way I see it, I'm seeing a little difference, a little change in regenerative stuff. But I'm still seeing a lot of old conventional things being taught. So we're just continuing that. But I have hope knowing that it has to. I see a lot of scientists out on the landscape and biologists trying to find solutions. And we have an incredible capability in tech now that we are really just diving into. And so it's going to happen. It has to.
Are there many, we're talking about like a tag in an animal communicating to your smartphone and a drone, like is a sort of technological infrastructure exist in
Mm-hmm.
your area to facilitate that?
Yeah, I think the infrastructure exists.
Okay.
But we definitely have to modify it and build on it.
Yeah, because we're talking about communities, sparse kind of municipal governance, et cetera. Like how does...
And also the idea of tech and
Right.
Big Brother. That's the other
Yeah.
massive barrier in all this is every rancher is afraid that, now everyone's going to know what I'm doing on public land with my cattle. Well, if your cattle on public land doing nothing but grazing in appropriate and wonderful ways, then what do you have to hide?
Yeah, although I think that privacy argument is somewhat problematic.
I think it's
generalized to other contexts.
absolutely.
It's certainly problematic.
But it's based on, in my opinion, it's based on old views.
Yeah.
And that might not be completely accurate. Mm-hmm. And so, again, we have to be okay with asking tough questions.
Yeah, and I guess a distinction there, it comes to mind, is the animals are grazing on public land. Like, we don't need to necessarily get in. Like, that's a hot button issue, too. Like, we've opened a lot of doors here that could be really flammable. But the notion of ranching on public land, yes, it is public.
That's right.
It's as much yours as it is mine, as it is, some investment banker in Montana in Manhattan or some homeless guy in Tampa, right?
Mm-hmm. And in holistic range management and sort of these new ways of ranching and so forth is the old ways of networking and community and togetherness. And part of what broke the system of ag, in my opinion, is the idea that we just closed all books and we didn't talk to our neighbors and we didn't share our challenges and our failures and our successes. And we have to get past that in order to get better. And that Big Brother thing is part of that. For sure.
That makes sense.
And I get it. It's real, but we can also start to move beyond some of that stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, do you see progress within your community, with your neighbors?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I have some incredible neighbors.
Awesome.
Yeah.
If folks want to learn more about this, how can they get involved? Or actually, let's talk about that on a few different levels, right? Like they're first, as a consumer, right? Like, how can I make better choices to support the great work that you and your colleagues are doing?
That's a great question.
Are we there yet? Can I buy a steak that I know has been sourced in this way?
Yes.
It's predator safe and all. I don't know what the terminology is, but
tolerant or friendly. Yes, you absolutely can. And there's some really great companies through Montana, through the West. There's bison and beef that you can purchase. There's sheep that you can purchase. You just have to do a little bit of homework.
Sure.
And
how do you do that homework?
You can
other than just sort of ask you after this interview, can I buy some beef?
Well, I mean, look at Western Sustainability Exchange. Start looking at companies that are supporting these ranchers. Start looking at people like Yellowstone grass-fed beef. That would be a great starting point.
Okay.
B-Bar Ranch beef. That's an organic, great, amazing place to get beef. And there are many just like that. And so just do your homework or call Yellowstone grass-fed beef or just do some Googling in the state of Montana. I'm a good resource. I could definitely direct people to the right places of where I know that beef is coming from. Barney Creek in Paradise Valley.
Okay.
Many others, not many, but a number of others that are doing really wonderful things. And so as a consumer, that would definitely be a good way to do it. Yeah.
And then Lara, we haven't talked about other forms of entrepreneurship happening in rural areas, but I know this is a passion area for you and you're trying to elevate a lot of this work through Ground in Common. Mm-hmm. How can people learn more about, what's happening with rural entrepreneurship and if you're a student here or somebody interested in entrepreneurship yourself, like how can you be confident that it doesn't only have to happen in a city?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So groundincommon.com, certainly that's one place where we're highlighting both things that solutions that Malou and others have, but also identifying the challenges that need to be solved. So entrepreneurs that have the great skills that institutions like the University of Montana Business School and others have instilled, but would rather be looking at a challenge to actually solve with their business acumen. That's another thing that we're trying to pair more and more, which is those individuals don't necessarily have the ideas that are coming from a challenge or based approach, but we can help tee those up, and then do they crowdsource that solution with a business idea in mind? So those would be two different ways of thinking about it, but there are many individuals that I think have these amazing ideas but just need this ecosystem around them to help activate it. And that's where the system needs to change a bit. And we need to figure out what that formula is for helping those individuals, those rural impact entrepreneurs that need those resources. And investment systems need to change. They have to be much more accessible to a larger swath of society. It cannot be so rigid. Do we need to initially look at grant funding for those just to get an idea off the ground? How do we remove so many of those barriers that are in place that really prevent great ideas from becoming business solutions? And I think that's the opportunity before us, and there's no better place to be exploring that than in Montana.
Yeah, do you see any things to get stoked about with regard to investment paradigms changing and this fourth sector, as you call it, emerging?
There's just so much more conversation around the need for this change that I definitely see it happening. I hope it happens faster in Montana, but I see in pockets around the country, there are individuals that are really thinking, okay, maybe the system that we've been, blanketly supporting just with profit in mind isn't working for everyone. Is there still a solution that is profitable but has, as we were saying earlier, a much more holistic approach that's taking into account stakeholders and not just shareholders? And I am encouraged, because that will have to happen. We're just seeing too many examples of that previous system burning out fast, and there are durable models and durable systems in place. It's just going to require a different mindset, and I think that those individuals are out there.
Well, I think two of them are right here doing the hard work, and I thank you both for coming in and sharing the story. Before we close, Malou, are there any other just issues I should ask you about to get you in trouble? Like, we want to talk about religion or
let's talk about
veganism?
Let's go on to politics
that?
and veganism.
Sure, yeah, why not? Okay. Yeah, what else could there be? Gun control? You want to talk about gun control?
Yeah, that would be good. Okay. That would be a good one.
We'll save that for pod number 2.
Anytime.
All right, ladies, thanks so much for coming. Have safe travels home, and really appreciate the work.
Thank you for having us.
All right, that one was super fun, and I learned a ton. I hope that you did too. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. And we're coming to you from Studio 49, a gift from University of Montana alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. And remember that A New Angle is supported by CED, Consolidated Electrical Distributors. These guys pretty much sell anything electrical you would ever need, but they also hire a ton of our students. If you want to learn more about jobs at CED, visit cedcareers.com. Before we go, I want to thank some important peeps. Our awesome interns, Aspen Runkle and Max Gibson, Jeff Ament, John Wicks, and VTO for the tunes, and finally, props to Jeff Meese, our master of all things sound. Finally, if you have any questions, suggestions, comments, insults, whatever, please email me at anewangle@umontana.edu. Help us spread the word, and be sure to use the hashtag #anewangle when you do. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.